Hello everyone and welcome all for this new session of your SAS SQL. So with SAS SQLs, let's have a glimpse of topics which we'll be covering. So it's the topic called as SAS SQL Essentials. Now it's essentials means what is the basics required while writing a SQL program within SAS environment. That is what you are getting introduced. Okay. So moving ahead, as you all know that for SAS training, the topics we are going to learn is all divided into chapters. So let's introduce the first chapter for SQL. It's introduction of your SQL language and understanding the course logistic. Then lesson 2 will be basic queries where you'll get the overview of SQL procedures, will specify the columns, specify rows, and of course, at the end of every chapter in your PDF book, you have solutions for your activities, demonstrations, and exercise. Whereas lesson 3 is going to be displaying query results, we'll be presenting the data, and then we'll see how one can summarize the data. Lesson 4 will get introduced to SQL joins. So what are SQL joins? The types of SQL joins. Okay. So we have inner join, outer join, complex joins. Then fifth chapter is going to be subqueries. So what are subqueries and types of subqueries? So non-correlated subqueries, correlated subqueries, and also we'll get introduced to what is inline views. Lesson 6 is all going to be your set operators. Now, what are set operators? What are the types of it? It's all in this chapter. So we'll see union operator, outer union, except and intersect. Lesson 7 is from SQL, or when we write a program with SQL in SAS, we'll see how one can create a new table or a view as well. So this is where we'll see how one can create tables and views. Whereas lesson 8 is all about advanced Proc SQL features. We'll see how one can query the dictionaries. So this is the area, as you remember last time in macros I said about dictionaries will cover in more details into SQL. Then we'll see about what are the various options with Proc SQL, and of course it's an interface with macro language, how one can create macros. So it's just an refreshing point or refreshing topics, this two which we'll be looking. So ideally we are going to learn with 8 chapters in this particular SQL topic. Okay. So moving ahead, let's start with the lesson 1. All right, so our lesson number 1 is all about introducing your SQL, or SQL is termed as structured query language. All right. Okay. So in this objective is we are going to describe the historical development of structured query language and we will explain how SQL is used. So moving in further ahead, as now you have already got introduced that SQL stands for structured query language. Basically, it's an independent language. It is used mostly to query the databases. I repeat, it's an independent language. It is mostly used to query databases. And when we are using into SAS, of course, it's the same SQL which other softwares are using. Only difference is because we are using into SAS environment, there are certain SAS rules and regulations which we have to follow while writing the SQL code. So because it is a querying language, so when I say it's a query language, it's like you are writing certain dialogues on a particular system, or you have the same SQL server where you fetch in the information from databases. So when I say it's databases, it means that when you're working on a live scenario, on a live project, you will not work on small data files with 10 rows, 20 rows, 50 rows, or 100 rows, or 1000 rows. You have databases with huge data capacity into it. So it could be millions of rows, thousands of records. Okay. and thousands of columns. So in that case, you cannot open the whole table into your system. Your system will get crashed. So therefore, we, as you know, there are big systems like we have Teradata, which is one of the biggest data warehousing software. Then we have Oracle working as a software, which is to hold or to work as a database software itself, data warehouse software. Same, we have SAP, we have Sybase, and we have independent MySQL server as well, where the data has been stored for a specific organization. So when you have huge tables in these databases, you need to connect to those databases, fetch in the information by writing certain dialogues, and get in only those required columns and rows into your own system. In that case, we use SQL. All right, and hence it's called as structured query language. So it's a very specific structure of writing a program. It should follow the same sequence, hence it is structured. And when we say query, query means of course the dialogue which we are writing to the databases, that is the query which we are writing to query that table and fetch in the information from that table from your XYZ database like Teradata or Oracle or SAP or Sybase or even Hadoop. In that case, Hadoop is actually your database structure. Okay, so same is when you have this data files in this huge databases, you connect to this database, you write certain dialogues to them, and that dialogues is written with request to your SQL language, and it's called a structured query language because it's a specific structure of writing a query or writing this program, or this query means you're writing questions to those data and it is fetching the information for us. Okay, so that's what it's telling. It's a standardized language originally designed as a relational database query tool. So relational, as I said, it was mostly for querying your databases. So when we say it's relational database, that means every table when you are saving it in your database has some and other relation among with them. So when we say relation means every table indirectly or directly is connected to each other on the basis of a common column. Hence, they are also termed as relational databases. So if you look at this example of this query, it's a specific structure. It is having a specific way. It's a sequence of writing. Hence, it is a structure. And this is the query that you are asking to select this column from this table with only specific rows. Okay, hence it is a question written for a specific database so that this query will be working or executing in that database to fetch in the information for us. Okay, so it's currently used in many software products to retrieve and also update the data. So as I said you, though it's an independent language, but it is incorporated with various data or various softwares to query your databases. Hence, in SAS also, it is incorporated to query the huge databases. So up till now in SAS, you people have come to know that we were working only with SAS dataset. So it was a very stipulated small table at class environment. But even the same SAS table, when you have millions of rows and thousands of columns is saved on a database, you need to use this SQL language to fetch in the information. Okay, so let's see the progress and the timeline progress of SAS and SQL in hand. So SQL was predominantly developed in the year 1970s by IBM. So it was started processing by IBM. So by mid 80s, like 1980s, its first commercial SQL product was released. And since 1980s, SAS and SQL in corporation, they developed their way of writing SQL. And since then, since 1989, the first version of SAS SQL was available with your SAS programming environment version 6.6, which introduced a procedure of SQL into SAS. And since then, since 1989 onwards, the relationship with SQL and SAS is moving ahead and it's getting developed day by day with various features. Okay, so that's what it's telling. This is the structured query timeline and its history with SAS. Okay. So this is what I was explaining about relational data. So when you have databases, there are tables into it which are saving information. Like for example, in case if you're working on any life sciences data, where you have maybe it's a table for clinical trials. So when we say it's a clinical trial data, data is massive. It's huge. Okay, because the trials are most of the time conducted globally, multi-centric, so there are huge information for that particular drug trial. So in that case, every table, maybe it's a table for your subject visit, it's a table for your adverse events for that particular trial, it is the table for suppose dropouts, it is the table for suppose ailments, it is the table for suppose um, uh, certain outliers. So all this information is actually connected to each other depending on a specific column. So maybe directly or indirectly. So when I'm saying directly, it's like for this example, you have customer data, you have order fact data, you have employee ID data. Now this is the data for a specific organization. For a specific, this organization is mostly we are going to use, Orion Star Sports data. Okay, now this organization is into sports goods. They are selling the sports related items. So they are selling it either retail stores or via catalog sale or via internet sale. So they have the huge database and they have a various customer pools. So they have customer data, they have orders data, and they have employees data also. So when you see customer and order fact data, you may have something in common with them. The column is customer ID, because customer data, of course, the key column is going to be your customer ID, but order fact is also going to have the information about what order was placed by which customer, which employee attended, what was the product ID, and so on. So hence customer and order fact is directly connected to each other by a very common and a key column called customer ID. When it comes to order fact and employee ID, so employee ID is all the information of employee addresses. Sorry, employee address is having the information of employee in details like their name, ID, address detail. So this employee and this order fact is having a connection with them with employee ID. So in case with if you want to know that this customer, order fact, and employee, all three are connected to each other, but they are not directly connected to each other like customer and address. There is no common column in both of them. But yes, the intermediate, that means if customer and order fact are connected by customer ID, then of course including employee ID, which is a part of your order ID, which gets as an intermediate result of this two column. So you'll have employee ID will be indirectly connected to customer ID, and same customer ID is indirectly connected to address. So hence this type of information, when it is saved in your databases, this data is termed as relational data. All right. Okay. So when we are going to write an SQL language into SAS, make a note, it's an independent language. Okay, hence I use the term SQL language when it is written into SAS. SAS has developed this SQL language in such a way in its environment that it is starting with its proc step or procedure step. Hence, SQL in SAS was developed with a step called procedure, or you call it as proc SQL. All right. I hope till now everyone is able to follow what we are discussing.
Yes, Ashwini.
Yes.
Okay, great, great. The newcomers.
Yes.
Yes, yes, Ashwini.
Okay, great. All right, fine. So this is an SAS enhancements, okay? Whereas SQL query itself follows certain standard rules of programming put forward by international guidelines by ANSI standards. So when we say Proc SQL follows the rules of querying the databases as per an international standard norms like ANSI. Is called as American National Standard Institutes. Now this is the institute which has come forward to put on some guidelines and rules about databases, and SQL follows the same guidelines and rules. As per these guidelines, it can create the tables as required and can be saved in your databases. All right. Okay. It also includes certain SAS enhancements also. So what are those SAS enhancements? We'll see it in upcoming slides. Okay. So it's telling Proc SQL what it does. So it's telling it's a tool for querying a data. It's a tool for data manipulation and management. It's an augmentation to your data step of base SAS. It's not at all a replacement of data step, and of course it's not a customized reporting tool. That means the reporting tool like in base SAS, which procedures which we have come across is like proc means, proc print, proc frequency, proc tabulate or proc report. So these are some of the procedures which are used as a reporting tools. Proc SQL is, though it generates a report, but it's not a mere reporting tool. And of course, though it is performing data manipulation and management techniques, hence it's not a data step replacement. But yes, it's just an augmentation, that is it's a bit in hand in hand, or it you can say it's enhancement with your data step, but it's not a replacement of data step. Okay. So proc SQL procedure versus your traditional SAS code. Now, when we want to generate a report, I'm just giving an example. In case if you want to create a report where you want to generate the report in groups for specific orders, okay? So there are various orders, or you have various products, correct, for your organization. As I said you, we are working with Orion Star data, and for this Orion Star organization, we know that it is having the sports data. So when the orders are placed, we know there are various products with the company. So depending on various products, if you want to create a report on every customer within a specific time as a group of observation, or in case if you want to generate a report on various product IDs in various timelines, either from the month Jan to March, it's the first quarter. So for every product, suppose it's a product A, B, C, so you want to create a group of reports on product A, product B, product C. So in that case, first thing is you need to sort your data on the basis of products, correct? That is product ID. Once it is sorted, then the new data set which is created, you will be using it into generating a report, and then you will be writing a procedure, either proc print to generate the report to create its group wise output. So this is where with SAS data step or with base SAS, you have to first create your required data set. Then that data set you have to sort it in a specific order, and then you can generate a report. So these are the multiple steps which we perform when we use base SAS. But when we use Proc SQL or SQL language, we write only single query from a single table to generate a report. So in one go, in one step, you generate a report where the sorting part and all those part is done within this query. But when you are writing base SAS steps, you need to follow multiple steps like data, proc, proc. Are you getting it? So that's what it's telling here, that proc SQL procedures can sometimes reduce the results of multiple data and procedure steps with a single query. All right. Okay. So when we are having this ability to use your SQL language, the input data source can be any type of data source. It could be either a existing SAS table or any DBMS table. DBMS stands for Database Management System. So here either you can connect to the databases like Teradata, Oracle, Sybase, MySQL, Hadoop, SAP, okay, all sorts of databases you can connect. You write the query and you can generate the output in any form. You can also pass on the information in the query as an input information of an SQL view. So what is an SQL view, that also I'll tell you. Okay, but this is various type of input source where you can generate the reports, either a simple report, a table, or a view, or even a DBMS table. Okay, so these are some of the features within SAS. Hence, it's telling SQL is developed with the procedure in SAS with Proc SQL. All right. So when we are using this SQL language, you need to be very careful with the terminologies we are using. Why? Because SQL language is a query language to query the databases. So when we say it's databases, the terminologies we use for your data sets as table, for variables as row columns, and for observations as rows. So these are the terminologies which we have to follow. This is the terminologies which we're using for SAS data. Correct? So when it is a file, we call it table. It's a record, we call it row, and a field, we call it as a column in SQL, and this is in SAS. Okay, so the question is, have you worked with Proc SQL? So the question is very general. It could be a rational answer from every one of you. So it's not mundane that everyone should have the same answer. All right. So this was just a brief introduction to SQL. So moving with your course logistics, let's understand what is the data we'll be using it. So as we discussed, the data which we'll be using is for the fictitious organization Orion Star Sports and Outdoors. So this is a fictitious global sports and outdoors retailer that has a traditional stores, online store, and as well as a large catalog business as well. Okay, so this organization's data, we are going to use it as a reference data to learn our query language. So because it's an organization data, it's giving us the feel about mimicking it with the live scenario about various data marts. So we have employee data, we have orders data, we have customers, we have suppliers, and of course the input or the data could be saved in any format. Either it's a SAS table, this type of structure with rows and columns with a red dot indicates it's a SAS data set. This is a raw file. This is also a raw file, but it's a structured raw file in Excel format. All right. Yes. So to learn your programming, you can use any interfaces of programming of SAS, either your 9.4, which is your windowing application, your enterprise guide, or SAS Studio. So we are going to use SAS Studio, which is a cloud application. All right. So this is how the windowing environment, which is the current version of it, is 9.4. It looks like this. Then we have Enterprise Guide, which is also a desktop installation, but it is the licensed copy. And it is also having an interface of programming and non-programming, that is point and click applications also. And of course, this is a cloud application which connects to the SAS server with cloud server of SAS where this software has been developed, and we are using the SAS server when we are using this cloud application. All right, so it has a interface of programming as well as point and click interfaces also. All right, so depending on what software you are using, again, this question is general. So we are going to use accordingly the software. All right, so when we are working into your data for referencing any pre-existing data file, let's understand the naming convention. So the program file of SAS code, it's always saved as a icon with a running man with a red dot. So in our studio as well, if you have observed in within SQL, this is actually the data set with this icon, and this is your SAS dataset code or a file. So see this file name, and see this file name is ending with .ss. So the extension .ss indicates it's a SAS code file, and the extension with .ss7b dat indicates it's a SAS data file. All right. So in our training, we are going to use certain ready to use code for our training purpose. So if you have observed this, there are certain ready to use code for us. So this S1 stands, it's an SQL training or SQL track. Preceding to it or next to it, it stands chapter, what chapter the code is, and its information. So when it is 02, it indicates it's lesson 2. So here it's 04, it indicates it's chapter 4. D is it's a demonstration. 01, it's of course it's placeholder, like what type of it's 1 or 2, and A is its version. Okay, so this is how we have the nomenclature of your existing SAS code files. So see, first part is SAS code ID, it is SQL. Then chapter. Third part is what type of code it is. Either it's a demonstration, activity, exercise, or solution. So it's a demonstration. Okay, it's item and space holder. That means it's version. All right. So it's demo one for lesson 4 for SQL training track. Okay, S1. So yes, during your training, you are familiar now that you have certain exercises provided, and those exercises are of 3 levels, level 1, 2, and 3, which is challenge. All right. So Sal, challenge level 1 is
Ashwini, you are not audible.
had a connection issue, so I just lost it. I'm so sorry. Let's move ahead. So we were here, right? Okay. So this was the topic which we were discussing. Yes. So during your course data, we are going to connect to all these SAS data files by using your libname.ss code. So either you can create this code and save it, or you can write a libname statement directly. So if the path which we are going to use is regularly, let's create a macro for it and use that path in your libname statement. That's it. So it was all about connecting to your data files. So in case you need to connect to your data files, I hope you know you are going to write this at the beginning of your session. So whenever you start your session, see to it you connect to your all data sets with this libname statement. All right. So I just copy this for the newcomers who can always make use of it. But remember, the path will vary according to your system. Okay, so pay attention only with the, be very careful when you are writing a path. That's it. So it's the end of your lesson 1 where you got introduced to your SQL language. This was with macro. Let's start with any questions up till now about SQL from anyone?
No, Ashwini.
No. Swarupa, Priyanka, Swarupa, Nilima just answered.
No, Ashwini.
Monica, Shanmuga, do we have today? Yes, we have Shanmuga also. Padma, Priyanka. So now let's start with lesson 2, which is basic queries. In this lesson, we have three topics: overview of Proc SQL procedure, we'll specify the columns, and we'll specify the rows. Now to get started with overview with Proc SQL, let's understand what are the objectives we are going to learn in this. So we'll identify the key syntax of SQL procedure. We'll list key features of SQL procedures, and of course, we'll list key features of your select statement, and we'll also list SQL procedure statements. So to begin with, a general introduction. So when I have this programming part of my SAS Studio window on, so in SAS, we write this SQL language which starts with a procedure called Proc SQL. Okay, so it ends with quit. So within these two statements, we are going to write certain statements which is called as query statements. So that query statement actually begins with select. Within select, you have its various building blocks called as, or the select statement ends with a, every statement ends with a semicolon, okay? And it starts with an identifying keyword. So the select statement is actually a query statement, okay? And within this select, you have various building blocks of it, or you call it as clauses. And those are from clause, where clause, you have order by clause, you have group by clause, you have having clause. All right. So these are some of the small building blocks within this query statement of select. These are the part of your select. It has to be written in the same sequence whenever you're using it, and your select statements ends here. Okay, so your select statement ends with this semicolon here. So within this pair of SQLN and quit, you can write multiple select statements, or the select statement is also termed as query. So you can write multiple queries within single proc SQL and quit, because it's a group of select which has been executing into single proc, hence it's ending with quit and not with run. All fine? When we write quit, it's same like if you have remember we had used this proc g chart. We were writing multiple chart options or chart statements like h bar, v bar, pie chart, and they all cumulatively were ending with quit. Correct? So same thing, proc SQL within quit and SQL, you can write multiple select statements, or it is called as query statements. And those are independently querying its, or it's doing its task independently. This query is not dependent on the previous query. Now this query is going to be related to any of this query. Okay, so what are these building blocks? What is this where? What is this order by? What is this group by? We are going to see it all simultaneously. So before or moving ahead with this, so let's have a simple example. So normally, if you want to check any data with simple, what are the columns and rows? You use most of the time proc print data equal to. So we can use a small data set from your help SAS help library called as suppose cars. Okay, and normally you simply write this and you execute your proc print. So with simple proc print, it's actually a list report where it lists all the columns and all the observations from your input table. So if you have observed with a pre-existing permanent library called as SAS help, correct? This SAS help, it's one of our permanent library provided from SAS. So it has existing tables. So you have this table called class. So this table, once you double click it, it opens into this view table. So these are these 5 columns and 19 rows. Same thing when you had written this proc print, it is listing all the 5 columns and all the rows into your output. Hence, we call proc print as a list report, right? Normally, if I am going to use SQL language, I write proc SQL. Within proc SQL, the following statement starts. It's a query statement called select. I write asterisk. I write a from clause where I need to provide the input source of the data which I need to query. So I write the same. Okay, I end this select and I end my proc SQL step. So now understand, I run this both the statements or both the steps together. So when I scroll down, I see this is the report for proc print. This is the report for my SQL. So don't you see it's the same report that it lists all rows and all columns. Same thing, all columns, all rows. Only difference is in proc print by default it gives you obvious column, but with SQL output it does not give you the row columns. Correct? So this is where, like this, when you write select with star, it's like select all the columns to be queried from your input source of table, and hence semicolon. So same now, if you want to select any specific columns for querying, so in proc print, what is the statement which we select the columns?
Where
Var. So you write var, and suppose you want to have name, age, okay, and what are the various columns we have? Name, age, height. So if you go back to our code, we can write name, age, and suppose height. Correct? So in select as well, if you are not going to query all the columns, let's select the columns name, comma, age, comma, height. Make a note. Though we are writing a program in SAS, but this columns, when we are selecting to query, it has to be separated by comma. Why? Because it's actually a query language. It's an independent query language. Its only thing is we are writing it into SAS, hence it's developed with Proc, but it is following the same database or database querying language rules. Hence, when you're selecting the columns are separated by comma. In base SAS, we never separate the columns with comma, but we simply give the column names separated by space. Correct? In the same order as you give the column names, the same order it will give you the output. Now check again the same thing. So this is your proc print with only 3 columns, and this is your SQL query result, which is with 3 columns. Okay, so this is how the sequence it works. So this is where when we had written select, so it's a keyword C, it is highlighted in blue. When we write select, it's going to select all the columns for query. But if you want to select only specific columns, you are writing it with column name separated by comma. So next clause, we can, if you want to select a specific rows, in proc print, we use where statement to select, suppose age is suppose greater than equal to 13, correct? Same thing in your SQL also, you can subset the query result by using your where clause. So you can write where age is greater than equal to 13. It's not ending here with semicolon because it's a part of select, hence it's ending here itself. So now when I execute this, see, see this. All right. So if you check your log with proc print, it's telling 12 observations were been selected with this criteria. For SQL, it's simply telling SQL has been processed. Now there is a difference in giving this in detail in your procedures of base SAS, and there is no in detail procedure of SQL language provided by SAS as statistics into log. It's because it's structured query language. it is used to query databases. So here, though we are using an input source as an existing SAS table, but it's treating it as if it's a database structured table. Okay. Hence, it gives this information as if you're querying a database. Whereas here, it is querying the existing table of SAS. Hence, it's giving you this information. All fine. Is this basics of SQL understood with its statement and various clauses?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So in case now I want to arrange this result in ascending order of age. Okay. So with Proc SQL, what we have to do is you simply introduce a clause called as order by, and I use this order by statement to be arranging the order of my age in the form of ascending order. So by default, I do not write any keyword of ascending or descending. Default, it will be in ascending order. So when I execute this proc SQL, it will show me the observations, or it will show me the result in the age in the ascending order. But when I want to do the same thing with proc print, what we have to do? Will it do? Absolutely. So you have to write a separate procedure called as proc sort, and then you have to process it into order. So this is where the additional feature with SQL is that it is going to be a single step as compared to your base as multiple steps. So no need of your table to be sorted prerequisite, but here there is a prerequisite to sort your table. Okay. So we saw some of the clauses. Now group by and order by will give you the same result at this point. So what is the difference between group by and order by? I'll show you in upcoming slides. But up till now, I hope this part is clear with you.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
Ashwini.
So let's get introduced. So we'll identify the syntax. Okay, we'll identify the features of SQL. So let's understand this through a scenario. So it's telling, as a new Orion Star programmer, you have inherited several SQL programs. You need to learn the Proc SQL syntax to use and extend these programs and ultimately write your own program. So just exploring, okay, as a new employee with SQL. So basically, you know certain queries, but it's trying to tell you that you're writing the SQL program. It's starting with Proc SQL and ending with quit. And within these two statements, you have a statement called select, which consists of various clauses. So your proc SQL procedure is initiated with procedure, or SQL language in SAS is initiated with proc SQL, terminated with quit. This is the syntax. Now, what are these options in proc SQL statement? There are various options we'll see in upcoming topics as well. But here, in our result, we cannot see the row number. In case if you want to see this row number, you can get introduced to an option called as number. Okay, so we'll see one by one all this, but this is what I'm just introducing to you with SQL. So you'll see you will get a new column in your output result. It's only to your output result. You see this row number. Earlier it was not showing, correct? So like this, as per the syntax, you can introduce various options. There are various statements in Proc SQL which you can write. You got introduced to one of it called select, and of course it ends with quit. So Proc SQL procedure, it's telling multiple statements can be included in a single Proc SQL step. Each statement defines a process and is executed immediately. So if you remember in my earlier program, I said you, this is one statement, this is another statement, because the select, it starts here, it's ending here. And these are all its part of it, which is called as clauses. Okay, so it's telling this statement works independently, this statement executes independently. So like this, you have various statements. We'll see this is some of it, which is called as select. Apart from it, you have a statement called create table, create view, describe table, reset statement. update, alter. So these are some of the statements which you people will slowly get introduced. Okay, all right. So what is a select statement? Actually, it's a query statement where you start writing the query on what basis or what are the selection criteria for your table to be queried for your output report. So your select statement is used to query one or more tables. So at a time, it's not that you can query only one table, you can query more than one tables. So the result of the select statements are written to your output window default destination. Though it is a procedure, it's a proc step, it's not merely a report tool. Now, though it is giving you the report into your output window, but it's not a report which is generated. You cannot say it's a report, but yes, it's been developed in such a way that you can see the result into its output window. So look at this. Your select statement is ending here with a semicolon. Within the select, you are writing two clauses, from and where, and a third clause and order by. So you are querying employee ID, gender, salary columns. As per the standard query language, the columns are separated by comma. You need to give the input table from which these columns are to be queried. You need to give the selection criteria of rows, and of course the order in which the output should be shown. So in our case, we had used this existing table called sashelp.class. We used order by age. So by default, it's doing in ascending order. If you want this age to be in descending order, post column name, you need to write this keyword called descending. It's not the full word, it's only the keyword DESC. So when you execute this, the same result you will be seeing in, only the difference is the arrangement of your rows for age would be from highest value to the lowest value. Why? Because the keyword we have used is descending. So same thing on the slides they are telling salary descending. So this is they are querying a table orion.employee information. So within a select statement, you have small building blocks called as clauses. So you have where clause, sorry, from, where, order by. The sequence has to be followed the same. Hence, it's called as a structured query language. You cannot have the sequence of where to be written first, then from, or order by in any sequence. No, you have to follow this sequence. So it's telling although it can contain multiple clauses, each select statement begins with select keyword and ends with a semicolon. So it's starting here, it's ending here, and within it you have multiple clauses. So now in case what I do is I use this where clause sequence to be written before from, and I try to execute this query. See, I'm getting an error. So it's telling you have an error. So see, it's highlighting syntax error, expecting one of the following. Either you require quoted string or you forgot one of the special signs. Okay, it's a syntax error and can be ignored. So why it's telling you might have forgot one of the signs? It's because this select is actually to select the columns. So it's treating this where as not as the clause with select, but it's treating as a part of the continuation of your select statement. It's treating this is also specifying, we are specifying the column. Hence, it's telling you are forgetting if any of this syntax or any of the special signs you might have forget to separate the columns. So therefore, it's giving all the required keywords. Hence, it's telling expecting one of the following to a quoted string that either you might have forgotten a special signs any of this. Hence, a comma was needed, maybe because you are selecting a column. So this is where we know it's not a column, but it's actually one of the clause of the select, but its sequence is been changed. Hence, I move back to its original sequence. Understood? So you have to follow the sequence. Select, from, where, order by. Order by has an option either group by or order by. All right. So this is what you see the output of this current demonstration. You get the result like this. Only the females and only three columns and all the females with their salaries in descending order as per this query. Three columns, employee ID, gender, salary, subsetting the rows only on this criteria and arranging the rows on salary in descending order. I hope everyone is able to understand what we are learning.
Yes,
Yes,
Ashwini.
Ashwini.
All right. So this is what it's telling all about. Select statement required clauses. So select is to select the columns which you need to query separated by comma followed with the from clause. So in your from clause, you can specify the input data source which you need to query, and this can be up to one table or at least or not more than 256 table at a time you can specify in your from clause. So these are the various clauses. So from and select is required. Rest all is optional as per your business requirement. If you want to subset your data, you write where. If you want to group your data, you write group by. Group by always goes hands in hand with having by and order by. So the specified order of the above clauses within the select statement is required. As I said you, this sequence is required. You have to follow to write this sequence because it's a structured way of querying your table. Okay, now let's handle how one can get an error. So before moving with this, open this demonstration and work on it. D01, S102, D01. Your SQL select and from clause. Okay, so this is what it's telling optional clauses and it should follow the same sequence that also we know. So it's telling here that the where clause specifies data that meets certain criteria to select the observations. Group by clause groups data for processing. Having clause is always goes hand in hand with group by, that in case when you are grouping your data and you want to subset on a specific group, you are going to use having clause. Okay. And then order by clause to arrange the rows in a specific order. So all this in detail we will be seeing in upcoming topics. So the specified order of the above clauses within select statement is required. It's very much important. Okay, so now let's understand about the errors, how one can handle with Proc SQL. Errors is syntax errors. Okay, so you have encountered a syntax error in one of the programs. What techniques exist to check the Proc SQL code for syntax error? So there are certain ways that before even executing the query, we will follow this technique to find out whether the query has any syntax error. Now, why this is going on or why we are learning this? It's because sometimes being a data analyst, you're working on certain SAS codes which are pre-written. And it's been said to you that you need to look into this code, you need to check whether this code is generating the desired output. If it is, it's all good. If it's not, then you'll have to work on existing code, you need to reframe it again and you need to save it. So in that case, if the existing code you are not aware whether it has any minor syntax changes or errors which may give you error on executing, so before executing, let's check for any syntax check. Okay, so that's what this scenario is all about. So moving in this, you have this activity. So open this activity A01 for lesson 2. So let's open this activity. Coming into your studio, it's A01. So this is the first step. Okay, now understand this first step. I'm executing this. So it's giving me an output. Okay, so when you check your log, so it's telling your query executed without any errors. Now look at your second query. I'm executing this. I'm getting an error. So what does this error indicates? Now we have already discussed, look at your code carefully and tell what is the error.
Order of the clauses.
Yeah, ordered by
Yes,
employee ID. We should give a full name of employee ID.
no, employee ID is
Semicolon.
After from clause, where clause, then comes the order by clause.
absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. The order of your clauses. That's what is highlighting. It's not highlighting on column. It's highlighting on your where clause, telling it's a syntax error. So it's treating as if after column ID, this is also the columns which you're specifying to order by. Hence, the order of your clauses is wrong. So in case after executing, you come to know that the order is wrong, where SAS is executing and then giving you the error in the clauses or in the syntax, we can use a option here called as, there are various options here. Suppose you do not want to execute, but you want to check the query also. You can, yes, you can always write a statement before select called as validate. Okay, it's a statement. Fine. So what does this does? Let's check. There is no semicolon, maybe. Validate your current SQL query. So see what it's telling. Because of validate, it's telling this is a syntax error. So before going and executing, it will not execute your whole query, but it's checking for syntax error and it's showing there is a syntax error. So this is what validate is doing. It's one of the keyword which you're using in your Proc SQL. So like this, you have various keywords and options where you can, before executing your query, you can work on for this particular validate process. Okay, so what it's telling here with this current activity, consider the notes from the first two steps. Which step generated the error? What error message was? So you know it was step 2 which generated the error, correct? And what was the error message? It was something related to step 2 about the order of your clauses. Correct? So it was showing you the error on the order of your clauses. Right? Agreed, everyone?
Yes.
So it was syntax error expecting one of the following. So this was the error message. Okay, now coming to this activity A02, view your SAS output and log. Did the code generate any output? What does the note in the log indicate? So let's move into activity A02. Let's execute. Now look at here. I've used a keyword validate. Okay. And look at this order. Now execute and check your output and log. So does it give you any output? No. But check your log. Now it's telling that your proc SQL statement has a valid syntax, proc SQL used. So what does this validate do? It's actually checking for any syntax error throughout your query without executing this whole query. And hence, if there is no syntax issues, it gives you this message. Understood?
What to write to get the, like to execute the program also.
We'll come to that also. At this point, we'll come to that. But in your earlier program, where we don't have a specific order of clause, when we used validate, it gave us an error that it's telling something is missing. But in the current scenario, where the order is all correct and you're still asking it whether it's a correct syntax check, it's telling your proc SQL is valid syntax. Are you understanding? One can, if you are working on pre-existing codes, okay, because sometimes you get these tasks as a data analyst of SAS. If you are working on some pre-existing codes and you are very much sensitive about errors, so just validate your query before executing. That's what they are getting you introduced to this keyword called validate. All right. So did the code generate any output?
Ashwini,
No.
the order by employee ID should be like the tables one, right? Whatever in the table, we
Shanuka,
should.
just check with your table. Is employee ID its label or a column name? Let's
Oh,
check. Okay, let's check. You have a valid question, but let's understand. You are telling employee information table. So we were working with this table. So we have this column like this. So when I click here, it having the label and the name same.
employee ID.
So your query was related to EMP ID in which activity? This activity. So
Yes.
currently the clause is incorrect. So it did not went and check for any column only. It is just checking for the order of the clause at first go. All
Okay.
right,
Okay.
fine. First go is because of validate is checking the clause syntaxes in a specific order.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
But in this case, if what I do is if I rearrange this, okay, I rearrange this, I comment this validate, execute this. Let's understand now as per your query. Yes, it is going to give us an error for this column. Understood? Originally in your table, you have a column ID as employee ID and not EMP ID.
Yes. First, it's checking the order. Next.
Absolutely. It is first going to check your order of your query clauses.
Okay. Thank you.
Understood? Yeah. Of course, this column is not there, so it is giving you an error when the order is correct, but when it start executing the query, it finds this column is not in your table. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So with the current activity, did the code generate any output? No. What does the note give? The note was giving us proc SQL statement has valid syntax. Correct? Okay. So what does this validate statement do? So is used only in conjunction with select statement, tests the syntax without executing the query, checks the table and column name is valid, and of course prints error message for invalid queries. Now understood what validate does, Shanmuga? It was
Yes.
not checking for your column
Yes.
name. It was just checking for your query clauses and its order. All right.
Yes.
Okay. So common syntax error which we most of the time do is in your select statement, most of the time we give semicolon after providing the column names. Okay. So if I go back into one of the code and if I give this semicolon here, look at the change in this program color. Is from in blue color, is where in blue color.
Yeah,
No.
keywords are not highlighted.
Right. So now when I'm executing this proc SQL, I am getting error. So it's telling that though you have end with your select statement with semicolon, it's not understanding what is from, what is all the statements. And of course, it's telling if you are specifying a column, the column should be separated not with a semicolon, but with a comma. Therefore, it's telling all expected signs. Getting it? So this is one of the syntax error commonly we do while writing SQL select statement. Of course, there are another options that without executing your query, you need to check for the syntax. So this is not like validate, it's a keyword which is used as an options with proc SQL statement. See, it's an option written in proc SQL. Earlier, validate, we were writing it as a part before your query is written, after your proc SQL. So it was like this. See the difference here, and you're writing no execution here. It's a difference in syntax. It's the one of the options of proc SQL statement. It's an independent keyword which is written after proc SQL statement after this. Getting it? The difference between option and the statement here, everyone.
Yes, Ashwin.
So this is where no execution is. Of course, the word itself, no execution, means your query will not execute, but it will check for its syntax errors. So this is demo D03. So if I go back into my servers folders in my SQL with demo D03,
What is the difference in the
these are just the options which they are providing you to check for your validity of your or for your syntax checks for your query. That's it. Either you write this option or you write this validate as a keyword.
oh,
So see, it's not executing,
yeah.
but it's checking for syntax, and it's telling statement not executed due to no execution option. And because it has no syntax errors, there is no syntax errors message provided. Getting it?
No,
But in case if I write semicolon here and I execute with no execution option, see, it's giving error. So it's telling here it's an error. Got it?
yes, yes.
Okay. So to explicitly check for syntax error without submitting the code for execution, include no execution option in your proc SQL statement. This option applies to all statement in proc SQL. This is very important statement. This option applies. So what does this mean is, whenever we write this no execution as a proc SQL option, it is applicable for all the statements within this proc SQL with quit. That means if you remember at very first, I have shown you that a single proc SQL contains multiple set. So in case if I write no execution here, it's a proc SQL option. That means it's valid for every statement within proc SQL. But if I write validate, validate will be valid only for this SQL statement. Getting it? Understood the difference now?
Yes, Ashwin, clear.
Yes.
Okay. So this is what we had seen in log as well. Yes. So now, for example, moving back to our next. So this was about no execution. Okay. In case I write this query, I just close all this. Do not save any demonstrations and activities when you are closing it. Okay. The new people, Mona and Padma, even including Vikram, because these are the codes and files which will be you people will be using it frequently. So where did we write our age? This. So I write this query, okay, into this as a independent query. It's a new query in a single proc SQL, but a different table I'm querying. Okay, so in case if I do not write this, understand when I'm executing this proc SQL at a go, I'll get two reports, one for your employee data and one for your class data. So this is the query for employee data. When I scroll down, I get the report for class data. Correct? Now, though those are this is an independent query. This is an independent query. They are executing independently. I include this and I execute for this proc SQL. So this is what it's telling. Because I have written it as no execution option for proc SQL, it is valid for every select statement or clause. So this select is not executing but checking its syntax check. Again, see there is a next select after this. So this statement was for your first select. Then your second select is executing or reading, but it's not showing you or executing and giving you the output, but it's just checking for a syntax check. Understood? So this is a difference with, if you write this no execution, it is like global for every statement you're using within Proc SQL. All fine, but in case I want this query to execute, I don't want this query to execute. So what I can do is I can write a statement called reset, and with this reset statement, I use the option called execute. So what will happen, this no execution, which is a option valid for all the statements, it will overwrite with this statement called reset. So reset will reset all the options with Proc SQL for your upcoming query to get execute for this query. Now understand. I re-execute it. What I'm getting?
Only the second select statement.
Absolutely. So when I check my log, my first query is not executing, checking for its syntax check. Because of this reset statement, I use the option to reset this option information of no execution to execution. This select is executing and I'm getting the result for class data. All right, understood what reset is doing now?
So that applies to any kind of option state option.
Any. So now here earlier, now we know by default there is no rows, correct? No row number. If I want to have a row number, I want to include for this, I write number. Okay, I execute it. I got row number. Understood?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is where now you get introduced a second statement in SQL, which is apart from select, which is an independent statement. This is a second statement called reset. So it's telling after an option is specified, it remains in effect for the Proc SQL step. That is what it was telling. I was telling it is global for Proc SQL. So that within Proc SQL, any statement you're using, this option is valid within all the statements. So you can reset the statement to add or change Proc SQL options without restarting a procedure. That means if you want this new statement of select to execute, no need of introducing again Proc SQL and quit, writing a separate, just introduce this statement so that it gets executed, which is reset and reset your options. Okay. So additional Proc SQL statements are select, create, describe, reset, insert, quit. Quit is the end of your step. In this scenario, you got introduced to select and reset. Later on, we'll learn create, describe, and of course, insert statement also. All fine? That's it. And we'll see how one can specify columns. So before moving it, just try it out with this, what I have introduced to you with demo D03. Go ahead and work on this. Today, we'll stop our day. If you have any doubts, any queries, please let me know. Let's see to it, the topic which we have completed, you just revise it with the demonstrations and activities. So with this good note, have a good night, take care, and see you in the next class. Bye.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Yeah.